What is up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mythic Drafting. Today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 draft tips and tricks for the upcoming set, The Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. I hope you find this video helpful for your first drafts in paper and on Magic Arena. Without further ado, let's dive right into it. Coming in at the first tip is, I think that one of the important things in this set is going to be able to kill ring bearers of your opponents. The ring does have some quite powerful abilities, and there are some cards that give you the ring tempts you ability without making the card that much worse itself. A good example of this is Claim the Precious, which is just a straight up kill spell for 3 mana, and the ring tempts you. But if you can kill the creature that the ring has tempted, and they can't tempt the ring again, then they lose all the benefit from that. So I think that having enough removal to deal with your opponent's ring bearers is going to be important. To make sure that they don't get too much additional benefit out of the ring. The next tip is that creature types really matter in this set. There are a lot of abilities that reference different creature types, and it's really important when you're drafting, especially those first few drafts, to pay careful attention to what the creature types are that you're drafting. For example, Horn of Gondor really cares about having a lot of humans in your deck, and Mordor Trebuchet really cares about attacking with goblins and or orcs, which includes the Amass Orc army, because if you do, you create a 2/1 colorless construct artifact creature token with flying named Ballistic Boulder that's tapped and attacking that gets sacrificed every turn. So effectively, Mordor Trebuchet goes from being a pretty awful 1/4 defender to being a 1/4 defender that also flings your opponent for 2 damage every turn unless they have a 3 toughness flying blocker, which means they'd have to leave that back as well. But without having goblins and orcs and enough of them, this card's pretty bad. Another great example is Erkenbrad, Lord of the Westfold, which whenever it enters the battlefield or another human enters the battlefield, all your creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. So this cares about 2 things. It cares about going wide and having lots of humans. So make sure you're paying attention to the creature types of your creatures. Also, it matters whether or not your creatures are legendary. It's also important to remember that if you do have the ring tempts you in your draft decks, then that creature will become legendary as well. But there are a lot of cards that care about legendary. For example, Merry, Esquire of Rohan. If you attack with Merry and another legendary creature, such as your ring bearer, then you draw a card every time. And Undural Flame of the West is an equipment that gives +3/+1 and creates 2 tapped white spirit creature tokens with flying. But if your equipped creature is legendary, those creature tokens are tapped and attacking instead of just being tapped. And finally, there's Frodo Baggins, which every single time it or a legendary creature enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. So legends are important in this set, and it does boost the power of legends slightly up the order, and you want to care about creatures and other abilities that care about having legends or playing legends as well. We also have another ring-related ability, and I think when I say stack the ring, I mean stack your deck with cards that care about the ring. If you're going to be tempting and having cards that might not be as powerful as other cards without the ring tempts you, you want to be deriving maximum benefit from it. So for example, Aragon Company Leader, whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Aragon, you put your choice of a counter from among First Strike, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink on Aragon, and then you also get to put another one of those counters on up to one other target creature. So Aragon cares and benefits from having the ring tempts you, and so does Gandalf, Friend of the Shire, because whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Gandalf, you draw a card. And then there's cards like Sauron, which cares about being the ring bearer. If Sauron's the ring bearer and it attacks, you create a 3/3 tapped and attacking menace creature. There's a copy of target creature in your graveyard. If Sauron's not the ring bearer, you exile at the beginning of your next end step, but otherwise you just get to keep it. So when you're drafting the ring tempts you cards, make sure that you're also picking up cards that have benefit, and the more of these you have, the better each ring tempts you ability will become. It's also important, I think, when you're drafting to watch your curve. There are a lot of powerful, expensive cards in this set, and you don't want to be starting the draft by taking, 4, 5, 6 mana uncommons and commons, and then when you open Sauron or Saruman or the Balrog, you can't take it because your curve is already too stacked. So I think you really want to prioritize taking cheaper cards. If it's a 50-50 pick, make sure your curve is good and wait till you find something that's truly powerful to put at the top of your curve. so that you can make sure you don't get run over early and have a handful of clunky 4 and 5 mana cards that you never get to cast. Next, land cycling is also important, I think, in this set, and especially when we're coming off March of the Machines, where the land cycling abilities were 2 mana, and these cards weren't as good in March of the Machines, but I think the version here is going to be quite good in each of the colours. All of these cards are pretty relevant, and in every colour other than blue, it's a good 6 mana creature, but also you can just play it as a additional land. So if you have, say, 2 Generous Ents and an Oliphant in your deck, you can probably get away with running 16 or 15 land, and it balances the curve considerations, helps your fixing, and are also just pretty good creatures to top out with. The reason they're also better than the March of the Machines is just the fact they cost 1. Taking the first turn off the game or playing a 3-drop and land cycling on turn 4 just isn't as much of an opportunity cost as paying 2 mana on turn 2 instead of your 2-drop. So I think make sure you're bumping these back up your pick order to start the set when drafting. It's also important to remember that there are 2 Wraths in this set. The first is 1 ring to rule them all, which is a saga. The ring tempts you, and then each player mills cards equal to your Ringbearer's power. The second effect is you destroy all non-legendary creatures, which doesn't include your Ringbearer, and then each opponent loses 1 life for each creature card in that player's graveyard. So 1 ring to rule them all isn't a true Wrath, but it can be quite devastating if you're not playing around it. I think you've got to be careful if your opponent's in black and they don't seem to be playing a lot of creatures out. You may want to hold back your non-legendary creatures and prioritize playing legendaries if you can, to make sure this doesn't blow you out too much. The other one is Spiteful Banditry, which is your more typical Wrath, and this one's a mythic, so it's going to be a little bit rarer. But this is X red for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature, and whenever 1 or more of creatures your opponent controls dies, you create a treasure token, but that ability triggers only once each turn. So Spiteful Banditry is a card that your opponent can set up to Wrath more of your board than their board and leave some creatures for them behind. But at a high enough mana cost, this will also just be a straight up Wrath. So this is one to be aware of if your opponent's red and they're playing funny. But here I think these Wraths aren't as oppressive as the ones in March of the Machine, such as Sunfall. They are both a little bit more, ask a little bit more of you, and in Spiteful Banditry's case, it's a mythic in a set where there's about 20 mythics, so it's just not going to come up as often as we saw Sunfall in March of the Machine. Up next is the Sagas. There are multiple Sagas in the set starting at uncommon. There are rare and mythic Sagas, but I think it's important to remember, such as in Neon Dynasty Kamigawa, that these cards are better than they look. Oath of the Grey Host looks clunky and slow, but the end result for 1 card is you get a food token, your opponent loses 3 life, you create a treasure token, and then you get 3 1/1 White Spirit creature tokens with flying, all for just 4 mana and 1 card. That's a lot of value, and I think you're going to want to be picking these pretty high early to try them out. For example, the Bath Songs 3 and a blue, you draw 2 cards and discard a card twice, and then you get to shuffle cards from your graveyard into your library and add blue on the 3rd turn, which means if it's turn 6, you'll have 8 mana to be able to play a lot more of the cards that you drew with this effect. And then Book of Mazarbul is effectively amass 3, and then all your creatures get +1/+0 and menace until end of turn, which is going to be a good card in red to help you curve out. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Sagas are really strong and are high-performing uncommons, and you should be picking them accordingly. The next one is something I want to take a look at, which is a little bit of a tip, is that there is a blue-red spells archetype, and these things are easier to draft in the early stages of the format when people aren't potentially as aware of them. So Fire Inscription is 2 and a red for an uncommon enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. And then there's Erebor Flamesmith, which is 1 and a red for a Dwarf Artificer, 2/1. When you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we see 2 red cards, a common and an uncommon, that are going to be able to deal damage to your opponent and take advantage of every single time you cast an instant or sorcery. And then there are a ton of really nice instants and sorceries in blue and red, one of which is Treason of Isengard, which is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. You put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library, and you amass Orcs 2. So you get a 2/2, but then you also get to recur one of your previous instants or sorceries to keep chaining them for Erebor and Fire Inscription. And the fact that it's a creature in the version of a spell It's also helpful to make sure you're not dying or just put more pressure on the opponent. There's also a 1 mana blue cantrip. There's a 2 mana blue cantrip. Tons of cantrips in blue and a lot of burn removal spells in red that are going to allow you to just chain instants or sorceries, take advantage of this and deal a ton of damage to your opponent. So this is one that I highly recommend drafting early in the format because you might find that you can get up to 4 copies of Flamesmith and maybe even 2 copies of Fire Inscription and truly go off. The final version of this, I think, is there is a food-themed deck in green-white. Mushroom Watchdogs is 1 to green for an uncommon. And you can sack, it's a 2/2, and you can sack a food to put a 1/1 counter on it, and it gains vigilance until end of turn, but the counter sticks around. And there are tons of ways to create food, such as Peregrine Took, which is a 2/3 for 3. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead. So this helps you get even more food tokens. And then there's Rosie Cotton of South Lane as well. When it enters the battlefield, create a food token, and whenever you do create a token, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. So there are tons of ways to create a deck with enough benefits from making tokens that you just truly chain them and go off and just generate an inordinate amount of value. And then if you have a ton of food lying around, Mushroom Watchdogs can become a problem really, really quickly and take over a game. So I think this is another synergy deck that'll be fun to draft early in the format before people are potentially aware of how powerful it could be. But that's it from me. These are my top 10 tips and tricks to start the draft for the format. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy the video. I'll be posting draft videos as soon as the set is released on Magic Arena, so make sure you come back to check those out once it's released. And I hope you enjoy your first drafts, and let me know in the comments what you think and what you're most looking forward to when drafting this set in a couple of days.